Welcome to Outnumbered, and as we wrap up 2017, we look back on the accomplishments of the president in his first year and a look ahead to what it will mean for his second year in term. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, everything, happy everything. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today the editor of townhall.com, Katie Pavlich, National Review reporter Katherine Timpf, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and Outnumbered today, GOPAC chairman David Avella is here. We remind him he's outnumbered on this beautiful Christmas day, but he rolls like it doesn't even matter.
Merry Christmas and countdown on to the ball drop New Year.
Right? Oh, we're ready. Bring it on.
Bring it on.
Okay, let's do this. Get to the news. In spite of a tumultuous first year in office, the president has a list of solid accomplishments underneath his belt. For starters, his first big legislative win after the passage of the GOP tax bill. The Washington Examiner ticking off a host of his other accomplishments, which include getting a highly respected conservative judge confirmed to the Supreme Court in Neil Gorsuch, appointing a one-year record number of judges to the circuit courts, scrapping a host of burdensome and unnecessary regulations, he says, playing a big role in the fight which essentially helped destroy the Islamic State savages, and approving pipeline projects and securing new oil drilling. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders recently touted the president's first-year successes, saying they're not getting the attention they deserve.
The president has been a tremendous leader when it comes to growing our economy, creating jobs, creating optimism in our country, and putting America first again. This is something this president talked about on the campaign trail, and he is delivering. I think the fact that he has been defeating and helping lead that effort to defeat ISIS is a major success story that's been completely missed and completely underreported by most of the mainstream media over the last year.
And when it comes to the economy, a big measure is the Dow Jones. And it has soared, certainly hitting record after record during the president's first year. David, your thoughts?
President Trump and the Republican Congress have delivered on what we talked about last year, which was making people more economically and personally secure. And this first year, just as important, now sets the table and sets the platform for next year. We're going to look at welfare reform. We're going to look at an infrastructure bill, all which will make the 2018 political environment very different than what we have talked about this year, and will make for some interesting elections.
Just a quick follow to you. So as we are ending the year, we're seeing historic lows in the popularity numbers for this president, historic for the United States of America for a first-term president. Yet he's getting these things done. You hear Sarah Sanders saying he's not getting the credit for them. What are your thoughts on those low numbers?
They have lots to do to go up, but these policies will help do that. And let's also keep in mind, just because an elected official isn't necessarily popular, doesn't mean people don't support their policies, and doesn't ultimately mean they get reelected, because people will judge them on how their lives are better. And in this case, this first year, we're heading in that direction.
Jessica?
I respectfully disagree, but you knew that was going to happen. Maybe not the respectful part. I think that the low approval numbers do have to do with the president and these policies. There's a reason that Democrats are up 13 to 15 points in the generic ballot, that everyone is expecting a wave election, which just historically happens in a cyclical way. But I don't see it that way. And the president also promised a bunch of things that are not happening, like the wall. He didn't get health care done or repeal and replace, though removing the individual mandate is certainly a step towards that, which some people would think is a good thing. I personally don't. But it was interesting because when I saw those lists of accomplishments, I actually was saying to Kat, I was like, oh, I didn't really realize all this was happening, because there have been so many controversies, like the Charlottesville remarks or the sons of whatever comment that he made about NFL players that people, I believe, have focused on. So I can see why a conservative would be happy looking at that list.
You know, another thing, and I mean, you've listed a couple things that were played out on Twitter or wherever we happen to see them that became bigger perhaps than anybody had anticipated. But, you know, Kat, Sanders has a good point when she talks about the coverage of the good things from the administration, because when you look at some of the surveys that were done earlier and all the way through the end here of 2017, there's been so much negative coverage of this White House.
Right, absolutely. And there is some of that, to your point, that he does bring on himself a little bit. He likes to fight. He doesn't care if he does things the way that people think that he should do in that office. However, some of the negative coverage is ridiculous when you're talking about things like the number of Diet Cokes that he drinks per day, and is that having an effect on his mental health?
The extra scoop of ice
The extra
cream.
scoop of ice cream. Does he eat at McDonald's? Who cares? I eat McDonald's. I drink Diet Coke, and I think that most people kind of do that
I put
sometimes.
Diet Coke on my ice cream at McDonald's.
Yeah.
People relate to the president because he likes KFC, he likes regular, everyday people things. So on that level, they do like him. But back to David's point, it is true that they don't have to personally like Donald Trump to like his policies. President Obama, for example, is very popular personally. Many of his policies are not popular, which is why we've seen a referendum over the last year on a number of his policies. And in terms of the media coverage, the reason why they choose to seize on controversies rather than digging deep and doing the work to cover judicial nominations, to cover the ins and outs of the tax bill, is because it's easy. They're trying to protect President Obama's legacy by making sure that they seize on the controversies rather than promoting the accomplishments of the administration.
You know what's also interesting about what you're saying, Katie, is that if you'll recall, Democrats finally in the end, just before Barack Obama was exiting the White House, were saying they may have underestimated the polling, which showed how upset people were about Obamacare, how it wasn't working. And that was kind of a shortcoming as he was exiting out the door. David, you're nodding.
I had to chuckle when Jessica said that, well, he didn't get all these other things done. As if everything he talked about in the campaign had to be done in the first year. Which
Well, he said it was a day one situation with health care.
Well, it was a day one priority. It was a day one priority. We just saw
said it was going to be done, though.
Submit the 8 project ideas. I mean, so this is in process. We'll see what happens in early 18.
Any president would be pleased to have a first year like President Trump has just pulled off. Let me also add, it's interesting that, that's where partly there's a disconnect with national Democratic leaders. They're suggesting that somehow getting rid of the individual mandate, which is somehow going to make people who have to pay a government penalty for an insurance plan they can't pay for
Technically
because...
a tax.
Technically a tax, that somehow they think voters are going to be angry at the GOP because now they don't have to pay a tax for
But it's not just that. It's over $300 billion lost to the economy over the next 10 years. We also could talk about on the health care front the Children's Insurance Program, which hasn't been funded, and a number of states are going to be losing. And that's something Republicans and Democrats should be concerned about. With the individual mandate, right now Obamacare has a plus 21% approval rating. I mean, it was, as you say, as Obama was leaving, it was not popular. But today, under threat of what the GOP would do,
or just
it is
mystery.
popular.
I think
you think it's just mysterious?
But explain how it's acceptable for people to have to pay a penalty for a health care plan they can't pay for because it's too expensive, because the insurance companies have all pulled out of their state and they have potentially just one insurer in their state.
They're forced to buy something that they wouldn't voluntarily purchase on their own, and then on top of it, it's too expensive. So they either pay the penalty, which is now up to hundreds of dollars, or they're forced into an Obamacare plan that changes year after year, and they get taken off the plan, and their benefits change, and their doctors go away.
Because they can't keep
the
their
hospitals
doctor.
in rural areas have now collapsed. We don't have that network anymore.
There hasn't really been a president that's been able to do everything that they say they're going to do. I think that we're all unfortunately used to the fact that that's how politics works. Sometimes they say something and it ends up not actually working out that way.
Kat, I want to get you in on this point because I don't hear it enough. I was looking at pictures just this morning because, sometimes on holidays you'll kind of look back. I was heartbroken still. I have relatives down in Texas who are not in the Houston area, but were part of some of the efforts to get goods there for people. People are still hurting. This is a president who went down, who was very visible there, Florida, Puerto Rico. And I know he took a lot of grief on that, but he spent some time on that island as well this year. I was with the special counsel to the president, Kellyanne Conway, on the air the day that he was in Puerto Rico. We talked about that. Florida, the Keys, still a mess. I mean, so much happened in rapid succession in his presidency during the hurricane season. No one really talks about that.
Right. Plus, he's dealing with investigation. He's dealing with a lot of people who don't consider him to be a legitimate president. He had maybe the hardest year as a president that he could possibly have, whether some of it's his fault, some of it isn't. I think some of it is.
Nature is
But nature certainly isn't, and a lot of things certainly aren't. And if I were in his position, I'd probably be doing a lot worse than eating McDonald's to deal with it. So.
Well, but based on the pace of the year that we've had, the White House hasn't been so concerned about PR. I mean, the first 3-4 months of the staffing in the West Wing and what was going on, it was chaotic until John Kelly came in.
I think it was longer than 3 months.
4 or 5 months,
yeah.
6 months, right? But they did finally get a handle on it at the 6-month mark over the summer, and they really have had a lot of accomplishments that have been severely downplayed. I mean, we are hardly talking about the fact that ISIS is now removed from Iraq, which is a huge deal considering they were marching across the territories, slaughtering Christians, engaging in genocide, destroying artifacts and things that have been there for thousands of years. That is now over, and we obviously have to continue dealing with them here. But that was a huge concern of Americans just a year ago, and they're still in America. Their investigation's open. However, the fact that that is now an accomplishment on the list that's being downplayed should be highlighted.
Well, ISIS had grown to 14 countries. We were able to get in there with Raqqa and get rid of their nesting hole where they were, but they're still in many other areas. As you point out, we have a better shot now at really going after them. Sexual harassment scandals continue having a huge impact on Congress and already on midterm campaigns, apparently. So far, scandals claiming 4 House members, including John Conyers, as you know, of Michigan, Trent Franks of Arizona, Blake Farenthold of Texas, and Ruben Cullen of Nevada. Did I say that correctly? I think
so.
Okay.
Or I say it wrong, too.
And on the Senate side, Al Franken's resignation leaving some wondering if his appointed successor, Tina Smith, will hold up in a competitive primary or general election challenge. Some are still wondering, when is he exiting, actually? And when it comes to campaigns, Florida Democratic candidate Mary Barzee Flores shares her Me Too moment in one of her first ads.
As a woman who's worked since I was 15 years old, I've dealt with handsy customers, with harassment, and even assault from a boss. And as a lawyer, with a judge who made a crack about my looks on my very first day in court.
In Kansas, Democrat Andrea Ramsey has dropped out of her race amid questions over a 2005 sexual harassment lawsuit by a former male business subordinate. He filed against her. Ramsey, in a statement, says the backlash is out of control. Quote, "It is a rush to claim the high ground in our roiling national conversation about harassment. The Democratic Party has implemented a zero-tolerance standard, and we are in a national moment where rough justice stands in place of careful analysis, nuance, and due process," end quote. Kat, what do you think about that?
I think that I know that this is a political discussion, but when it comes to things like sexual harassment and sexual assault, we need to try to not at all look at it as being something political. If your candidate is someone who's accused of these things and those accusations are credible, you can't care about politics anymore because we have to put our humanity in front of that. And I've seen that some people are able to do that better than others. And it's not a bummer when something comes out about a candidate. It's a good thing because that means a woman's getting justice.
Or a man.
Or a man.
As we've seen, it's not just the women who are apparently getting harassed, as we saw with this lawsuit.
Well, and you know, Jessica, you and I talked about this, I think, in the green room very early on. This is about power. I mean, it does break
Power and
along.
dominance.
It does most often break along gender lines where women, because they tend to have less power, they have less representation in most places, including on Capitol Hill.
Absolutely, and I'm glad to see bipartisan legislation coming down the pipeline that will hopefully address that in both the Senate and the Congressional sides. But power, dominance, as we discussed, and it's physical strength as well. I've been talking this about a lot of people. We can't change the facts that men are typically going to be stronger than women. If you're talking about a real assault here, I'm not talking about a hand, an inappropriate hand. But I absolutely agree with you, and I have been guilty myself of thinking oh, bummer, right, because it was a candidate or it was a politician that I liked. But we do really need to move past it and just say we don't need any of these people.
It makes the workplace safer.
Right.
Yeah, and for everybody.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting because you'll hear, and I know you're hearing probably what I am too from sources, no names, but 35 to 40 more people could be touched by this in terms of accusations against them on the Hill. That's a lot of people. We've got the midterms coming up. What do you think?
There will be more members of Congress who will not be in Congress because of situations like this, and it's unfortunate. And as voters make...
And you think in the short term, relatively speaking?
If reports are true, yes.
Yeah.
Just as not only the allegations and the accusations and the actions that members have potentially done, but also Republican Congress needs to get rid of the funds that allow members of Congress to pay sexual harassment claims from federal tax dollars. That is a must. That must happen.
Well, you're seeing a bipartisan push to do just that with Barbara Comstock and that group, right?
Spears.
You've got, yes, and Jackie Spears. It's bipartisan, as I said. She's a Democrat. So you've seen that, the bill put forth. I had Barbara Comstock on my show Overtime the day that she put that on the floor of the House, and I said, so, you know, what's it like there? Are there a lot of men coming with you? And she said, well, we have two that I know that will.
We have two.
We have two.
And I couldn't roll back the tape. It was live, so I would like to have rolled back the tape and said, huh? But, you know, it takes time, I guess, for everybody to come on board. I don't know.
Well, the thing is we want these things to move quickly, which is important. You know, we want to address these very serious issues on Capitol Hill in a fast fashion. However, when it comes to legislation, we are talking about legal obligations here. We are talking about the law. You cannot just rush something through without not understanding the constitutional aspects of it, the legal implications, what it means for every office, and what the requirements are for people to actually meet the legislation. Sometimes we push through legislation that actually doesn't solve the problem that we're looking to solve because we don't actually think through some of the unintended consequences of how people can get around it. Is this something that people can actually comply with in terms of how the office structure is set up with the budget? It's not just the fund that they've been paying out these sexual harassment claims on. They've also been secretly paying them out through their office budgets. So how is that a question that we address, right? So there's more work to be done for sure.
As we look ahead to the midterms, I'm seeing a list of more women joining the competition, so that will make this year an interesting set of races to cover as well. And when it comes to the midterms, growing concerns among Republicans that they could lose control of Congress, at least one chamber, after November's elections. But Democrats have their own worries as far as fundraising. The hopes and fears on both sides of the political aisle and what it could mean for the balance of power on Capitol Hill. And new reaction to President Trump's recently unveiled national security strategy, how it differs from previous policy and how his America First approach could play out in the coming year. Merry Christmas. We can't say that enough.
After years of gains, there is growing concern that Republicans could see big losses in the 2018 midterms. Right now, Republicans control the House and Senate in Washington, but the Hill is reporting some Republicans are worried after the 2018 midterms if there is significant voter backlash against Trump on the local level. This could all start to change. Next year's election takes on special meaning because of the upcoming redistricting process set to begin with the 2020 census. State legislatures are responsible for crafting those maps, so if voters elect Democrats to their state houses, it could eventually impact the balance of power on the federal level. Democrats lost 514 seats in the 1994 midterms as Bill Clinton's approval ratings dropped. Republicans lost 628 seats in 1974 after the Watergate scandal, and Democrats lost 762 seats in 1966 as President Lyndon Johnson's approval ratings fell during the Vietnam War. Now a new report says President Trump is telling advisors he plans to be heavily involved in the midterms and do a lot of campaigning for Republican candidates. So we're going to go to our one lucky guy for this because he's our political guru. Should Republicans be concerned considering President Trump's approval rating is very low?
The most important thing Republicans can do is govern effectively. And if we have a year like we did this year, and we pass welfare reform, and we pass an infrastructure bill, we will be in a good spot going into the 2018 elections. And to my fellow Republicans who like to worry, I think of my mother's comment, she'd be worried if she didn't have something to worry about. That is how Republicans can be sometimes.
Yeah, well, Jessica, you were saying earlier that you believe and your party, Democrats, think a wave election is coming based on the generic ballot and the situation in the White House. Can you expand a little bit on what's going on that side of the aisle?
Yeah, so there's hope. I mean, what happened in Alabama obviously was a boon. We have overperformed in every election that we've been in since President Trump took office, even though there were some that we didn't win, but still did better than we were supposed to. But as I said, historically, it's just time for a wave, and I would encourage everyone to look at what Amy Walter's been writing about in the Cook Report. She's really on top of this. I agree with you. The best thing Republicans can do is govern effectively, and I think as a message for both sides, we need to be very careful, Republican and Democrat, where we send our leadership. Some districts do not need Donald Trump showing up there, just like some don't need Nancy Pelosi or a Chuck Schumer. You need to run very district-specific campaigns and make sure that you're talking to voters with an awareness for who they are positive on.
Right.
I'm not so sure Alabama is an indication. I've heard a lot of people say that, but that was its own crazy land situation.
I'm just saying it's given us a little bit of a high because people still expected that Roy Moore could win despite these allegations.
Right, but I don't think that that indicates anything moving forward. Although President Trump's approval rating is an issue, he still has a base that is really, really stronger than we've ever seen. I mean, there's certain people where if you say anything mean about Trump, it's like you just attacked their own mother.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very, still an asset that he has going into midterms.
Well, and the question, too, is the districts that President Trump won, that Obama won in 2012, whether those will go back to blue or whether they will stay red is going to be a big question, right?
Yeah, so I think this is the part where Speaker Paul Ryan and other Republicans yesterday got it right. And Diane Black, who was on overtime, said it too, Congresswoman. When people start to open up their paychecks in mid to late February and they start to feel or don't feel the tax legislation that is being passed for a third time today as it goes to the president's desk, as the House revotes, when they start to feel that, they can make a determination on the ground around that proverbial kitchen table that we all talk about in politics, whether it's working for them. And that's why I think you're right on the president's approval ratings, because that's really all people vote on. They're not taking his poll numbers into the booth.
But David, that's a big question, though, because we have talked about on this couch last week and this week that Republicans have done a poor job, and you've admitted, of selling the Republican tax bill that is going to actually cut taxes for the majority of the middle class. If they can't use good messaging going into 2018, is that going to be a problem?
Yes.
And how do we fix that?
We have to be good
How do you solve that
promoters
problem?
of the success that we have had. But you referenced something in the top of the segment, which was redistricting. And as we look towards the drawing of lines, and I get confused. I can't decide, is this week the week that Democrats say we've so gerrymandered districts that there's no way they can win seats, or is this the week that the wave is going to be so big that they're going to take Congress? Because it can't be both. And if they truly believe they're going to take Congress next year, then all of these lawsuits that they have tied the courts systems up with, that redistricting is unfair, has all been for naught and a big waste of money.
Well, and one of the people who's been
Not their money.
Heavily involved in the redistricting process is former Attorney General Eric Holder, who, of course, you know, was heavily involved in the Justice Department, but also in redistricting and voting going forward.
You know, not for nothing, it isn't just the redistricting process, it's the PR around it as well. I mean, that's kind of the role that I understand Eric Holder and some others who are going to be playing, and that's their role.
Isn't that true for everything? I mean, just what you said about the tax bill, you know how to sell the tax bill for Republicans. I know what to say in contra that. You say, oh, you're getting a tax cut, and I said, well, wait a couple years, you're going to lose that tax cut, and it's actually going to go up on 53% of Americans. With redistricting,
it's not a couple of years.
Well, I'm just saying that's what I would say, but I didn't say that. But the point is about redistricting, especially, everyone likes it if they're the ones drawing the lines, right? Like if Democrats can draw the lines and they can make sure that we get our voters in, that's great. If Republicans redraw the lines and they can get their voters, it's great. Which is why, you know, so many people run on getting rid of redistricting in this way, and then nothing ever happens.
Well, 2018 is going to be fun.
Like immigration reform.
Buckle your seatbelts,
I love
everyone.
2017. There are a few days left.
Yeah, there's a few days left. Here we go. All right, moving along. President Obama, he is not. President Trump revealing a new national security strategy that differs sharply from his predecessors. As the president calls it, putting America first. How this is playing on the global stage and here at home. Plus, we've seen the president and the press battle it out over the course of this year. A recent survey now showing the president may indeed have a reason to paint the press as hostile. We'll debate.
A lot of reaction to a major address by President Trump, in which he unveiled his administration's national security strategy. That speech made clear that this White House has a very different worldview than past administrations by putting America first. And the commander-in-chief is touting one of his primary campaign promises. Watch.
This strategy recognizes that we cannot secure a nation if we do not secure our borders. So for the first time ever, American strategy now includes a serious plan to defend our homeland. It calls for the construction of a wall on our southern border, ending chain migration and the horrible visa and lottery programs.
The president also made a point of using language that President Obama would not, especially when it comes to fighting terrorism.
Our strategy calls for us to confront, discredit, and defeat radical Islamic terrorism and ideology, and to prevent it from spreading into the United States.
But for some Democrats, the chief concern still seemed to be one thing: Russia.
Russia deliberately tried to interfere in our elections, that they have a propaganda campaign that is detrimental to our interests. President Trump just can't say it. He still embraces Mr. Putin. So he cannot acknowledge what Russia did here in the United States and what he's doing, continuing to do in Europe. And that's a fundamental problem we have with President Trump.
David, do you think we'll ever hear from the left, ISIS, ISIS, ISIS?
It's a great question. Katie and I were at a White House briefing on national security just 2 weeks ago. And it's very clear, two things really. One, we're going to deal with the world as it is, not as we may hope it to be, which has a very different strategy and very different tactics. And when pressed, the senior administration official who talked to us said, let me give you one example. As we were fighting Syria, the old policy was there can't be more than 3 helicopters in Syria at any one time. And what we're doing is saying the military generals decide how we're going to fight this war. And you don't have to call Florida, the major military base where decisions are made here in the U.S., to make every decision. You're on the ground. You make the decisions. It is a different turn from where we have been the last 8 years.
Jessica, do you think that the Democratic Party, as we head into 2018, will look and say, you know what, we needed to do more and say more about the Islamic State savages at the time?
If they're smart, they will, and they'll also talk about immigration in a different way. I think that there is a way to toe that line where you can show that you're concerned about the personal safety of Americans, both at home and abroad, and also continue to maintain that we are a compassionate country that takes those that are really seeking refuge abroad and deserve to be here. It's not as if when a terrorist attacks in Times Square or on the West Side Highway or anywhere that they're checking political affiliation, as it were. So I think Democrats do need to be smart about that. There was a great piece in the New York Times by Ross Thought about the victories with ISIS that I think I would recommend everyone read. And I think that Democrats can also say, you know, we are part of this. We fight in the military as well. We support our military, and this is a great thing. And it gives people then the chance to not have that talking point. Like, Dems won't give Trump any credit.
To take it that much further, though, what this president's doing that's different, Kat, is saying America first.
Well, what I've liked about the way he talks about foreign policy sometimes is what he's criticized for being isolationist on. I'm a libertarian. I'm not an isolationist, but I am a non-interventionist for the most part, because you think about it, I obviously want a strong national defense because I'm not an idiot. I don't want to die, et cetera, et cetera. But when we're spending more than the next 8 countries combined, I think that that could be great if it actually results in maybe cutting military spending a little bit, which is something that nobody wants to say. But there is, all we've gotten as we spend more and more money has gotten more and more wrapped up in more and more conflicts. And that's something that President Trump has on occasion spoken out against, especially during the campaign. But he wants to spend more on the military. So I would like this if it did translate into
wait a minute. Spending more on the military by raising military salaries is very different than putting weapons on the battlefield.
But all of our equipment is outdated. We've had multiple accidents of ships running into each other due to outdated technology, planes crashing as a result of outdated technology. The fact is that we need to update our military. If you look at the global dynamic right now with North Korea and Iran, the Trump administration is making it very clear with what they're putting out lately in terms of, you know, talking points and having briefings at the White House, that they are getting the country ready for serious decisions that are going to be made about North Korea and Iran. This new strategy makes it very clear that Iran is the problem in the Middle East. They are going to take action to fight against them. And they're also taking terrorism seriously in the sense they're calling these jihadist organizations, which is something the Obama administration was not willing to do.
All right, well, the mainstream media was refusing to let up on its criticism of President Trump. And now most journalists appear to be putting the blame on the administration's criticisms of the press instead of themselves. Listen.
We've never had a president who so personally, directly, and unrelentingly attack individual reporters, reporters at large, by saying they are, quote, enemies of the people. I suggest to you this is a very dangerous phrase to use. This has to be unacceptable, because a truly free and independent, fiercely independent press when necessary is the red-beating heart of freedom and democracy.
This, as the Media Research Center says, coverage of President Trump's on ABC, CBS, and NBC evening newscast during September, October, and November of this year was 91% negative. Here's a breakdown. In November alone, 320 negative statements were made about the president, with only 33 positive ones. We should note these numbers are based solely on explicitly evaluative statements from reporters or nonpartisan sources. So, Jessica, do you think that at any point this hurts Democrats when it is that negative and you do get into the area of the Diet Coke expose and things that are sort of like that? Do you think that people get sick of hearing about it?
Oh, I think that they absolutely do. And I think that Democrats don't need to be concerned about our base, as it were, just like Republicans don't need to be concerned about Trump loyalists. But what you do need to be concerned about are moderates and independents, and those who are really looking at what went on in the last year, it'll be 2 years at the midterms, and making a decision on the spot. They're saying, I don't really like either party, which is majority of Americans who are not fans of either. And they will look and they will say, I don't care about the Diet Cokes, I don't care about the ice cream. But they will say, I do care about statements and controversies that have gone on. We agree. Obviously, this president brings a lot of them on himself. And maybe they will look at some of those accomplishments as well and say, well, why wasn't I hearing about that? If they do get to hear about it by then.
You hear Dan Rather's comments and you wonder, do members of the media wake up every day eating lemons to put them in such a sour mood to report on this president? One, and
fake
two,
news. Jim Acosta is down your fake news.
Oh, please. Okay. Can we just take a step back to the Obama administration? For Dan Rather to say that this president has done more to attack the press than any other president is completely bogus and devoid of fact. The Obama administration was spying on AP reporters, on Fox News reporters, on Fox News executives. They were tracking reporters' movements where they were tapping in at the State Department, tapping in at the Pentagon, tapping in at the White House. They were reading their, listening to their conversations, and they lied. Eric Holder lied to a federal judge about a Fox News reporter being a criminal co-conspirator in order to find out who his source was. And they prosecuted more reporters under the sources under the Espionage Act than any other president in history combined. So this idea that Trump, yes, he says things that are not popular to the press. I don't always like what he says about the press being the enemy, but when you talk about words versus actions, he is not the worst. Barack Obama actually went after reporters in a way that did threaten democracy.
Yeah, to many conservatives, this is the biggest accomplishment of the Trump administration.
Well, Harris,
giving it to reporters as they have given it to Republicans for decades.
Yeah, Harris, you brought up a good point. You didn't really hear about it quite as much when it was President Obama as you hear about it now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the point. They would have been covering themselves, because what we found out was that there were some cozy relationships between the White House and certain members of the media. We found that out from Ben Rhodes, who worked where? For the Obama administration, for the White House. He let us all know, he let the world know that, sometimes you kind of float things to friendly reporters. Look, it's not breaking news.
All presidents do that.
It's not breaking news, but when you enumerate the things, as Katie just did, and you look at the things that were being done, not necessarily just said, it is problematic that the American people didn't know more about it at the time. And of course, now you're judging it through the lens of, oh my gosh, we've never seen anything like this before.
But we have.
We have.
Well, you didn't see it as the difference.
Right.
Yeah.
To the public.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
You're judging it through a lens that allows you to say we've never seen this before.
Well, more than 100 professors and students are now calling for the removal of a statue of Christopher Columbus, saying it celebrates, quote, historical genocide. Should their concerns be addressed, or is this more political correctness? We debate next.
A renewed controversy over historical statues in New York City. More than 100 humanities professors and students sending a letter to the city's mayor demanding the removal of several monuments, including a statue of former President Theodore Roosevelt, accusing him of being linked to the eugenics movement, among other complaints. The group also wants a statue of Christopher Columbus taken down, saying he played a role in historical genocide of indigenous peoples. The letter says in part, quote, "For far too long, they have generated harm and offense as expressions of white supremacy. These monuments are an affront in a city whose elected officials preach tolerance and equity." Those professors and students say they don't want the statues destroyed, but placed in museum areas where their histories could be examined. This all comes after New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio called a review of the statues, quote, all symbols of hate on city property following the violent protests in Charlottesville back in August.
Wow, you know, that's an interesting idea, the preservation of them in a museum. Because remember, you'd heard people float the idea, well, just put a plaque up on some things and try to explain it. You know, my greatest fear is that if we erase enough of the substance of what happened to us, that the text, the visual, if we erase enough of it, I'm afraid we'll start to make the same mistakes, because some idiot out there will think that his or her idea is new.
So
some hateful idea.
People would walk past it in a museum and view it differently than they would view it if they're walking down the street and it was standing there?
I mean, I just had not heard that.
Well, the question for me is look, does that, you know, we're judging history by by modern day standards, which doesn't make what happened in history okay, but the idea that Christopher Columbus wasn't an important historical figure in the history of America and should be torn down because 100 professors and students send a letter to Bill de Blasio, you have to ask what the justification is in judging some of our historical figures who are the foundation of the country by their worst sins.
Jessica, you put it best, but in a different context, there is no perfect person out there. I mean, even when you're talking policy, no matter what you're talking, I mean, we know that some of our leadership that helped form the country and worked in, you know, leading us all had slaves. I mean, it is...
It's just fact.
Yeah, it's just fact.
Yeah, I have difficulty with this. I understood what was going on, certainly about the Robert E. Lee statue when we had the issue down in Charlottesville, and it seemed to be that that was also a majority opinion that was going on, that this was a symbol of hate and white supremacy and that we wanted that removed. When you get to Christopher Columbus and Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, things get a little hazier for me. I understand that it is difficult, and we don't all have the time to make sure that we're educating ourselves about every single aspect of all of this, because I'm not sure people think Christopher Columbus, slaughter of indigenous people. I think they think discovering of America. Right. And that is up to teachers to ensure that they understand the legacy of these people and the complicatedness of what happened when all this went on.
Parents.
But in a museum, that's a good thing. But at the same time, it is part of the rich tapestry of our nation that we did some things amazingly well and we did some things amazingly badly. And if people can't see that out on the streets, there's a problem. And a plaque, I don't think, does it. I think we need more civics education. Yes. We need people to be talking to their children about where we came from and how we got here. Yeah, parents and teachers and society at large.
Be the catalyst for that conversation. And can we be brave enough as Americans to embrace our history with our children and to see something and say, you know what, that was wrong, but look, this gives us an opportunity.
But what about
to talk about
is political correctness a response to that question?
Well, right. Well, we have to be able to have that conversation, and things like political correctness do prevent you from being able to have the conversation. I think that go ahead, if they could get rid of these statues, then they'll find another statue. I mean, like you said, all these people own slaves. You're not going to find somebody who is going to be worthy of a statue. Anybody in the world, you could say, oh, well, she did this. Me, I was Pocahontas for Halloween when I was in 3rd grade. I could never have a statue.
Off the show.
I could never have a statue because that was bad. I mean, these are important historical things that we need to discuss, maybe in a museum. I don't know, but you can't make it completely go away.
Well, it's going to continue, that's for sure. But on to something more fun. What's better than unwrapping presents on Christmas morning? Maybe paying off some of those student loans. What young people are saying and what that says about our education system. Plus, we hear it all the time when it comes to Christmas. Jesus is the reason for the season. But a new poll shows some Americans moving away from that idea. What to make of that shift? That's next.
The majority of Americans say they believe religious aspects of Christmas are declining in public life. According to a new Pew Research Center survey, that number now stands at 56%, with only 12% saying religious aspects are emphasized more now than in the past. Perhaps even more surprising, only 31% of people say that the decline bothers them. 25% say they are not bothered by the shift, and the remaining 30% say they don't notice any change. Meantime, the number of people saying Christian displays should be allowed on government property has dropped to 66%. That number stood at 72% back in 2014. Right now, I personally am not a religious person. I don't understand why anyone would be upset by a nativity scene or someone telling me Merry Christmas. It's not like they told me I hope you have a bad Christmas. I mean, why are people treating Harris Christmas like it's a 4-letter word? It's pretty ridiculous.
Goodness. You know what I wish? I wish more people, regardless of their beliefs or religions, would act like they have it. That way, you know, you could just check that box. Look, you know, we have a nativity scene in our town, and there are people who are for it and against it, and I just look at it as, you know, keep your joy on the inside. I mean, I look at these numbers and I wonder, I know how many people are unchurched now. I know how many people are, you know, don't check the faith box anymore. They have fallen away from that belief of something greater than me, you know, and I worry more about their journey than I do about whether or not they're comfortable with the nativity set that's placed on the City Hall lawn.
I just don't understand how it could be, that this story could be upsetting to anyone. Jessica?
I have no idea. I don't know how anyone could walk into a building and see a Christmas tree and a menorah and feel like, oh, how did that menorah sneak in there? Let's get that thing out of there, you know, and certainly people celebrating Kwanzaa or whatever you're doing to celebrate. It is such a special, fun time, the holiday season, where everything is just lit up. So I don't know why people would be negative, but to Harris's, you know, more serious point here, you know, we have seen a decline in religiosity in America. This has implications for our social society, our educational society. Economically, it makes a huge difference. We see people succeed more when they are part of tight-knit communities, and that is something that religion affords.
And give more.
I mean, charitable giving, we lead the world in that.
We are a nation that's based on our charitability. It's you know, people look to us as a beacon.
I find that in other ways as a not strictly religious person.
To take the religious aspect out of Christmas is the equivalent of taking the military out of Veterans Day and workers out of Labor Day. And if we're going to go down that path, we'll have a real uproar in this country when we just start getting rid of holidays and we all work every day.
I'll bring the positive side of this. Although the numbers do show a decline, I will say I was at the Rockettes last week with my mom, and we went and saw them, and they had a nativity scene with real camels and sheep on stage after they did a bunch of scenes with Santa Claus, so they combined the two. And you walk around New York City, it's the most beautiful time of the year to see all of the trees and the menorahs, and everyone's out celebrating. So yes, there's a small sector of society that is very anti-holiday cheer, and there is a religious aspect that is falling, but overall I do think that we are a religious country. Churches and synagogues have to do a better job of how they approach young people so that they want to be part, and mosques to be part.
You know what I love about what you're saying?
No, I know for the holiday season, I just mean generally the force of religion in society.
So that they want to be part of these tight-knit communities, so that their values of community and the Judeo-Christian values that this country was founded on really have built a society into what it is today. So keeping those values is important.
I love what you're saying because it takes it beyond that commercialization, too, that we see this time of the year, which you sometimes can feel in New York where everything is so glitzy, but you do see a lot of the heart. Look, tough things happen in the world. I personally think it helps to believe in something greater. We'll move on. What's the hottest Christmas gift of the year on the market? A stunning new Lind EDU survey finding nearly 3/4 of student loan borrowers in the United States would rather have money to help pay off their educational debt than equally valued gifts like iPhones, Super Bowl tickets, or even monetary investments with high growth potential. Really? Some sobering numbers. Nearly 45 million student debtors carry a collective debt of $1.45 trillion. An average of $28,000 per recent graduate. I'm seeing you nod, Jessica.
Oh, well, there's the Bernie Sanders platform right there in one read.
Oh my gosh, and he had like 45 million followers.
Yeah, he did very well. I mean, he lost, but he did very well, certainly with that argument. I mean, student debt is a tremendous issue in American society. College costs way too much. We don't have enough programs that are emphasizing vocational trainings, 2-year colleges. Not everybody needs a 4-year degree from Harvard. If you can get it, that is fantastic. But kids, I totally understand why they're saying, I don't need the iPhone, I need help with this.
And good for them, though, because everyone always says millennials are such idiots and we're not responsible. Well, it turns out people are saying, I'd rather pay off my debt than have a phone that knows what my face looks like. And that is very responsible.
It matches surveys that say that millennials don't like taking debt on, period, which is why they're not buying houses, which is why they don't want to buy cars. And it's why the tax cut is good for millennials because renters will be treated equally to owners.
You've gone too far, David.
Millennials also don't like
We've come full
stuff.
circle this hour.
Surveys also show that millennials don't like stuff. They don't like to accumulate things. They would rather have experiences and freedom, which is ironic
So
considering
I'm
they
still a
support
millennial.
Bernie Sanders. Don't really get the disconnect there, but hey.
I'm still a millennial at heart. I would much rather go someplace and see something and do something than have
Totally,
something.
and you can take fantastic pictures on that phone. I guess you don't really want, but you have those memories forever.
I never thought that Bernie Sanders would come up so often in this conversation right now.
Well,
but that's where his
every day he
too bad the
continues to burn me.
DNC wouldn't let him go forward.
Well,
that is not what happened.
There's probably
Okay, Hillary, what happened?
But the student
Give me
loan
another hour.
issue,
I gotta tell you.
the student loan issue is going to be a big problem, I think, for the
Can
Trump
you run on that?
administration. Well, I think you can, but the
In the
problem is
midterms?
the people that run on it, like Bernie Sanders, want the rest of us to pay for these loans that other people signed up for when generations before us paid their way through school, worked through school, paid off their own loans, no matter how long it took.
It is exorbitantly more expensive now,
And why
obviously,
is that?
to do this.
Because the government is pumping, the federal government is pumping thousands of dollars.
I think it's an irresponsible platform. I think that going with free college tuition and free health care completely is irresponsible, and it didn't work, and Americans saw through it. Maybe not people up to the age of 29, but certainly after there, when there was a cutoff, and then people broke for Hillary if you were voting liberal.
It's not actually free. You can't just create education out of thin air with no money.
Right, and the reason why tuition is so expensive is because there is no accountability for the universities across the country to actually have results at the end. Imagine this. Imagine signing a student loan in the same way that a bank would have to present a mortgage to you in terms of what you're getting, what you're signing up for, what the terms are, what the details are, how much you're going to owe at the end of the term. They don't do that when it comes to student loans. They just kind of put it in front of you, and then the advisors at the universities say things like, it's fine if you take 5, 6, 7 years to get your degree, because they know that the federal government is pumping money into these schools, and they're going to get it anyway, whereas the students suffer, and then in return, the economy suffers because millennials aren't working.
It's the same idea that you trick people into signing themselves over to this, and then they're paying off their debts into their 50s and 60s.
Exactly.
Yep. It's so true. You were awfully quiet there. You said your piece.
I had one big point, and that was it.
I know.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I was trying to...
Merry Christmas to everybody on the couch and to everybody watching. In fact, an outstanding Merry Christmas from Outnumbered, right? We'll see you right back here tomorrow, noon Eastern.